Welcome to another deep dive. Today we're exploring something really interesting, how the way you tell a story can completely change its impact. It's not just what you say.
Exactly. It's how you say it that can make all the difference. We're talking about something you might call dialectic narrative, or maybe just, well, strategic communication.
Okay, dialectic narrative.
Yeah, the core idea is pretty simple, really. There are often two very distinct ways to present an idea, especially one that might, challenge the status quo or sound a bit like a conspiracy to some.
Right, so how do these two ways usually look? I mean, think about it. One way often feels more emotional, right? Maybe more direct, almost confrontational.
It can be, yeah. Hits a certain nerve, speaks to a certain group.
And the other way.
That's typically more, let's say, rational, more moderate in tone. It's framed to appeal to a different kind of listener entirely.
Okay, and the aha moment here, I guess, is figuring out how to use both of these styles, depending on who you're trying to reach.
Precisely. It's about opening up dialogue, not, slamming doors shut. Because one size really doesn't fit all in communication.
That seems critical if you want to actually reach people who need to hear something.
You can't just stick to one script. A tight-knit community might get it, but the second you step outside that bubble, people have different ways of thinking, different things they listen for.
So you might have, say, this crucial message about peer-to-peer electronic cash. And you need to talk to the person who thinks it's a weird cult and the person who sees it as, I don't know, a complex financial tool.
You've got to speak their language. It's not about which way is inherently better. It's about knowing your audience and adjusting. Sometimes, the main way of talking about something has already reached, it's going to reach that way.
So you need new approaches.
You need new ways in.
Okay, to really get a handle on this, let's use an example. How about antinatalism? We're not debating the philosophy itself, or just how it gets communicated.
Exactly. It's a good test case because the core idea can be framed so differently. So on one side, you've got what you might call the more direct, maybe even conspiratorial sounding version.
Yeah, what does that sound like?
It might be something like, look, there's a global elite actively trying to reduce the population, using everything from abortion access to junk food, even pushing agendas in Hollywood and Disney movies. Very direct, very pointed.
Wow, okay. That's quite a statement.
It is, and that directness, while maybe jarring to some folks, it lands differently with people who are already, let's say, open to narratives that challenge the mainstream, or maybe aren't afraid of ideas labeled as conspiracy.
Oh, they're sort of primed for it.
In a way, yes. They're prepared to consider ideas that question the official story. This kind of communication, it's sometimes called a more trench or guerrilla style. It's raw.
Right, guerrilla. I like that. Sounds like it creates a strong bond within that group.
It definitely can. A sense of shared understanding, like we see what's really going on.
Okay, so that's one version. What's the other side of the coin? The rational version.
Right. The more measured approach. That might sound more like this. Certain powerful actors hold a clear ideology. They believe the world has finite resources, so logically, a larger population means fewer resources per person. Consequently, they use their influence to promote policies consistent with this worldview.
Okay, that sounds quite different. Much more academic, maybe.
Exactly. It's tailored for an audience that sees itself as more educated, maybe more discerning. People who'd likely dismiss the first version out of hand as just, conspiracy talk. They prefer things presented like facts, analysis, maybe like something you'd read in a serious news report. They trust official channels more.
So it really drives home the point. Same basic idea, totally different wrapping paper.
And totally different reception. The content is fundamentally the same, powerful actors influencing policy based on a population resource view, but the impact, worlds apart.
One gets you tuned out immediately by certain people.
While the other might actually open a door for dialogue with a different group entirely. It's like, think about religion spreading. The core message stays, but the way it's expressed, the metaphors used, they adapt to the local culture. Right?
Yeah, that's a good analogy.
It's the same principle. The delivery changes, the core doesn't. Marketing knows this inside out. You diversify your message for different segments. You can't just hammer everyone with the exact same thing, especially if you don't have massive institutional power behind you.
If all you have is persuasion.
You got to be flexible, highly adaptable.
Okay, this isn't just abstract theory then. We can apply this lens directly to something a lot of our listeners will know. The whole Bitcoin Cash, BCH versus Bitcoin BTC split. That whole intense history.
Absolutely. It's a perfect case study, and it raises that key question. how have the stories been told?
Let's look at the BCH narrative first. How is that typically framed?
Often, the BCH perspective presents the story as, well, a kind of a conspiracy, or at least a deliberate capture. It points to Blockstream and its allies, suggesting they intentionally slowed Bitcoin's growth to hijack its original mission as peer-to-peer cash. Sometimes specific financiers even get mentioned.
Right, and you can kind of hear it, can't you? That BCH version often sounds, well, rowier, more emotional. It definitely has that trench or guerrilla feel we talked about.
It does. It uses direct accusations, focuses on betrayal, on the loss of the original vision. It resonates deeply with those who felt that betrayal firsthand, people receptive to the idea of powerful interests manipulating things behind the scenes. It's very unvarnished.
Okay, so contrast that with the typical BTC narrative. How does that usually go?
The BTC story usually frames it as purely technical disagreement, just a debate about the best way to scale the network. And the conclusion presented is that, well, the most secure and decentralized option won.
And it often casts it as what? The little guy versus big corporations.
Yeah, exactly. It positions it as big companies aligned against the people and their home nodes, those individual users running the software. Those home nodes become the heroes, defending Bitcoin's purity against corporate takeover. It paints itself as the more conservative, responsible choice.
And that version, the BTC one, it generally sounds, well, more reasonable to the average person, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Especially someone who wasn't deep in the weeds back then.
It often does, yeah. Especially to people who prefer a less confrontational story. The idea of a technical debate where the best tech wins feels more comfortable, maybe, than a narrative about, capture or sabotage.
It avoids sounding like a conspiracy theory.
Right. And honestly, that narrative has largely become the mainstream understanding of what happened.
So fundamentally, they're both talking about the same events. The scaling debate, the fork.
That's the core, yes. But the BCH version comes across as more emotionally charged, more direct in its accusations. The BTC version, it's often more polished, aiming for that broad, reasonable appeal, particularly to an audience that might see itself as more intellectually sophisticated and maybe quick to dismiss anything that sounds too intense.
Which leads to a key point, doesn't it? Maybe the content of the BCH narrative has merit, but the form, the way it's often delivered,
needs to adapt to reach more people.
Yeah.
Exactly. If you tell someone who wasn't there, who didn't live through it, this really intense story of capture and betrayal, it can sound, well, almost unbelievable, too extreme.
Okay, so if we accept that some audiences are just turned off by that trench language, by anything that smells like a conspiracy, how do we actually adapt the BCH story for them? We need more tools in the rhetorical toolbox, right?
We absolutely do. When we're talking about the past, the history, we need a version that sounds more rational. More institutional, maybe, without using those loaded terms like institutional capture or concentrated interests or strategic bifurcation.
Because those terms just shut down the conversation for some people.
They can, yeah, especially people outside the bubble. The goal is to be understood, to get the substance across without sounding like a fanatic. It's about finding common ground, integrating new people who might be put off by really strong or politically charged language.
So let's try it. How could we tell that story, the BCH history, in that more measured institutional tone?
Okay, well, you could frame it something like this. Bitcoin was initially created as peer-to-peer electronic money. Its design included an incentive system meant to help it scale naturally with use, aiming for global adoption.
Right, starting with the basics.
However, over time, a different ideological viewpoint gained significant influence. This was the idea that Bitcoin should primarily be a store of value, more like digital gold, rather than a medium of exchange for everyday payments.
Okay, focusing on the ideological shift.
This viewpoint led to promoting limits on its transaction capacity, which in turn altered that original incentive system. The practical result: it became more expensive to actually use Bitcoin, making the network less useful for ordinary people.
Getting to the consequences.
So Bitcoin Cash emerged to return to that original design, keeping the incentives aligned with everyday use. It's fundamentally a network designed to scale, to be accessible, and to function as global money without compromising on decentralization or its core utility.
Yeah, okay. That feels very different. It covers the key points, the original vision, the shifts, the consequences, the return to the vision, but the tone is much less accusatory, More explanatory.
Exactly. It lets you talk about the divergence, the principles in a way that respects that different audience's preference for, a less heated discussion. It makes the core message much easier to digest, less likely to be rejected out of hand.
It speaks to people more comfortable with the status quo, maybe, showing them how this fits into a logical progression.
Right. And look, this isn't about watering down the truth or being, lukewarm. It's about adding another way to talk about it. Because ultimately, as Satoshi kind of implied, Bitcoin needs massive adoption to succeed. Millions, hundreds of millions of transactions,
This means reaching everyone.
including those who need that softer, more integrated message.
Okay, but here's a really important distinction you've brought up. This strategy, this refined, rational communication style,
Yeah.
that's primarily for talking about the past, right?
Yes, absolutely crucial point. It works brilliantly for explaining the history, the fork, the conflicts, the ideologies, how we got to where we are now.
But there's a whole other group of people we need to reach.
Exactly. The audience that's looking forward to the future. These people, they might not care that much about what happened in 2017. They're not interested in digging through old battles.
What do they want?
They want solutions. They want tools. They're looking for financial freedom today. For them, the history is kind of irrelevant. They need to see what this technology can do for them now and going forward.
So for that audience, the whole approach needs to change again.
Completely. With them, you have to speak in favor of Bitcoin Cash positively, not frame it against Bitcoin BTC. The whole conversation needs to be about potential, about solutions, positive, inspiring, and without dragging in old grievances or comparisons.
No resentment, just vision.
That's it. Imagine presenting Bitcoin Cash to that audience. The tone is totally different.
Okay, give me an example. How would that sound?
It would be more like, Bitcoin Cash is a network built for real-world use right now. It features dynamic blocks that automatically adjust to handle transaction volume, which means it can scale smoothly without network jams or crazy, unpredictable fees.
Focusing on current capabilities.
It also integrates smart contracts that are constantly evolving, allowing developers to build practical solutions, think stablecoins, tokens, decentralized systems that are actually accessible to everyone.
Highlighting innovation.
Plus, its actual commercial adoption is growing steadily. Thousands of businesses worldwide already accept direct payments in Bitcoin Cash. It's a solid, efficient, and open infrastructure, ready today to support a genuine peer-to-peer economy on a global scale.
Ah, I see. Yeah, that's night and day. It's all about utility, solutions, tangible benefits for the user's future. No mention of the past fights.
It showcases BCH as this robust, useful tool for financial freedom that exists now and is getting better. It's about the potential today.
So if we zoom out, connecting this to the bigger picture, this whole culture war of ideas, whether it's tech or politics or whatever.
It often comes down to knowing who you're talking to and when. Being smart about tailoring your message.
Okay, so the takeaway for people listening, if you find yourself talking about the past, the history, the context, the conflicts, think about using that discursive intelligence.
Well,
Tell the story in a way that resonates with an audience that values rationality, moderation. Avoid the battle language.
but if you're talking about the future, the possibilities, the tools, the cool new stuff, then switch gears completely. Showcase the vision. Focus on the positive, the empowering aspects. Ditch the resentment.
Talk about what it can do, not what went wrong before.
Exactly. Because, the tech we have now in BCH, in many ways, it's even better than what existed back in the early days. It kept the core money function, but added all these new capabilities, smart contracts, DeFi.
So Bitcoin Cash, or really any idea that challenges the norm, it needs advocates who can do both things, right? Sound kind of dangerous to the system because they're challenging it, but also sound reasonable to the world because they know how to communicate effectively, inclusively.
It's about reaching everyone who could benefit from this tool, getting outside the usual echo chambers.
Maybe that's the provocative thought to leave people with then.
Go for it.
How can you, listening right now, adapt your own communication, whatever the topic? How can you bridge those divides, inspire action, by recognizing that sometimes the most effective way to get an idea across isn't the most direct way?
Something to definitely mull over. It's a powerful skill.
Well, thank you for diving deep with us today. Hopefully this has given everyone some really useful insights into the art and maybe the science of communication.